Welcome back to Folder Decoder. In this series, I choose a chip folder that I've personally used throughout the Balnark series, or that has been suggested by viewers in the comments to highlight in a video. The idea is to break down each folder to see which chips go into the folder, and to see how it works, then show it off in-game. Keep in mind that the folders I feature in this series are not intended to be used in PvP matches. Net battling online is completely different from playing through the story and post-game content of each Battle Network game, and while I do have some knowledge of PvP in Balnark 6, I don't have enough knowledge in the other games to recommend any PvP folders. With the disclaimer out of the way, let's take a look at yet another Super Vulcan folder for the third time in this series and second episode in a row. So far in my Folder Decoder series, we've taken a look at two Super Vulcan folders, both appearing in the two separate versions of Balnark 4. In Blue Moon, Super Vulcan can be used alongside Metal Soul to have its damage doubled by charging the chip. In Red Sun, Super Vulcan works well with Gyrosol, which gives the chip an extra 30 damage per hit. These souls work well with Super Vulcan because it's one of the strongest chips in the game when used properly, all thanks to the fact that Super Vulcan fires 12 shots, each of which gets the damage buffs from Metal and Gyrosol. Generally speaking, Super Vulcan is paired with damage modifying chips, most notably Double Point and Attack plus 30, to help increase its damage to incredible heights. By using these two chips as well as two copies of Attack plus 10, Super Vulcan's damage is increased from 10 damage per hit to 120 damage per hit, for a total of 1440 damage, a combo famously known as the Silver Bullet combo. With Gyrosol active, Super Vulcan is increased to 150 damage per hit for a total of 1800. As for Metal Soul, by doubling the damage of each powered up hit, Super Vulcan is increased to a massive 2880 damage. Now, it is important to point out that you don't actually need to use Guts or Metal Souls to increase the damage of Super Vulcan, since full synchro exists in Balnark 4. However, having access to Metal Soul in particular is helpful, as using it to charge the chip for double damage is oftentimes faster and easier than trying to land counter hits before using the Silver Bullet combo. This leads us into today's focus, which is to use Super Vulcan alongside another soul that can double its damage. In Balnark 5 Team Proto Man, you get access to Gyro Soul as the second double soul of the game, and it's one of the strongest souls in terms of damage potential. Just like Metal Soul, Gyro Soul has the ability to double the damage of null element chips, though the way that it gets this damage buff is a bit different. Rather than charging chips, Gyro Soul doubles the damage on both wind and null chips by first using a wind chip. When a wind chip is used while Gyro Soul is active, the propeller on Mega Man's back will begin to spin. When this happens, the next wind or null element chip that you use will have its damage doubled. If the next chip used is another wind chip, Mega Man's propeller will continue spinning, doubling the next wind or null element chip as well. This theoretically means that after using one wind chip, Gyro Soul can continuously double the damage of each wind chip you use. But more importantly, we're of course using this ability to double the damage of Super Vulcan instead. In order for the folder to work, we'll of course need plenty of wind chips to activate Gyro Soul and get the propeller spinning. As such, we'll be including 4 copies of Airshot and 4 copies of Wind Rack into the folder, both of which come in the star code, so we don't need to worry about code synergy within the folder. This gives us a total of 8 wind chips, giving us pretty good odds of being able to reliably enter Gyro Soul and start spinning our propeller. You can also throw in a copy of Static S as an additional option for activating Gyro Soul, though you sadly won't be able to use the static chip for the propeller spinning effect. Once we've activated Gyro Soul and used a wind chip, we have 2 options. We can either continue to use more wind chips to rack up some damage, or we can use our Super Vulcan once we have Double Point and Attack plus 30 to power it up. Although it is fun to get a fully powered Super Vulcan going, doing so is a bit impractical in this folder, as it would require us to activate Gyro Soul and use a wind chip on the turn before using Super Vulcan. However, with 5 chips in a single turn, we can activate Gyro Soul, use a wind chip, then use Double Point and Attack plus 30 to power up our Super Vulcan. This would cause each hit from the chip to deal 200 damage, a total of 2400, still more than enough to wipe out any Navi other than Base XX or Magnet Man with his pesky super armor. As for the other options in this folder, I generally like to try sticking to the S code, since that's the code that Super Vulcan comes in. Plus, the S code in general is the best one in Bannerlord 5, which I'll be discussing in a future special episode of Folder Decoder. One of the best chips in the S code is actually Area Grab, which can be helpful to make sure that you're not limiting your own area too much after using Double Point, just in case. More importantly, Area Grab works well with chips such as Air Hockey, Drill Arm 2, and Hot Body 3. It also works well with the Wild Bird Program Advance. Speaking of program advances, I actually prefer running Big Noise over Wild Bird, as Big Noise is among the best program advances in the game since it hits flashing opponents and causes paralysis. In addition, the Pulsar 3 chip used for that program advance is a great addition into this folder, as it's a null chip that can also have its damage doubled by Gyro Soul. The Pulsar chip can also cause paralysis if it lands on an obstacle, bringing us to yet another great chip that you can include. Rock Cube. This chip is always a good one to include in a folder that already has Airshot, so you can use Airshot to push the cube into enemies to deal 200 damage. I do want to point out that you can decide to not use any of those additional options and just go with using Search Soul instead, where you can use Chip Shuffle to find your combo pieces. In this case, you can use chips such as Mark Cannon 1S to activate Search Soul, or chips such as Copy Damage, Life Sync, or even the Searchman chip itself. However, I do want to give a warning that if you do go with this version of the folder, you are risking having one or more dead turns if you don't find your combo pieces with Chip Shuffle. Lastly, there's of course the chips that I include in every one of my folders, those being Invis for defense, as well as Fast Gauge and Full Cust to get back into the custom window as quickly as possible. Now, with the folder's explanation out of the way, let's take a look at it in action. And that's it for the Gyro Soul variant of the Silver Bullet combo, which I personally like to call the Gyro Bullet combo. Real original, I know. Overall though, I think that this folder once again showcases just how powerful Gyrosol is. The damage potential with Gyrosol is pretty good thanks to the various multi-hit wind and null chips that it can empower with its propeller spin ability. And although it does technically require more setup than Metal Soul's variant, I think that this folder is still a very strong one. I also generally love using Gyrosol, so I'll find any excuse to use it in a folder. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel for some more Battle Network content. In addition to these Folder Decoder videos, I also make videos discussing other various topics in the Battle Network series, and have a second series called Network Evolution, where I discuss how specific chips have changed throughout the series. And seeing as I've now made 3 Folder Decoder episodes talking about Super Vulcan, I think it might be time for that chip to get its Network Evolution episode. And as always, thanks for watching.